What's up, champs? Welcome back to another episode of the Keeping Karlsson Short Shift Fantasy Hockey Podcast. I am your host, Ben Burnett, and joining me, as always, your other host, Louis Ezekiel. Louis, my friend, how are you doing on this fine Tuesday evening?
It is a fine Tuesday evening, and the reason I know it is fine is because outside it is sleeting. It's going to turn into ice overnight, and they did us the great benefit of letting us know that school would be canceled tomorrow before having to wake up in the morning. I'm so happy. Even some goals against can't bring me down here tonight.
There is so much snow on my street that they've been plowing for days, and it's just eating up more real estate on the sidewalk. There's currently a plow on my street, so if you hear any sort of background noise on my feed, that's like, you know how Dim Filipovic always has the ambulances running. The East Coast Canada version of that is the plow's always running in the background.
Yeah, I've got a buddy in Vancouver, and whenever we play video games together, it's nonstop sirens.
Well, Louis, I'm going to drop a siren. I'm going to drop a hot streak siren because we're going to start off talking about Mason Marchment, a player who was featured prominently on Sunday night's episode of Keeping Karlsson, hosted by our pal Elon. He was joined by Scott Cullen this week. They talked about that third line in Florida on Sunday, and anyone who listened to them and picked up Marchment or Lundell off the waiver wire was rewarded Monday night. 2 goals, 4 assists for Marchment, 5 assists for Lundell, and 4 points for Sam Reinhart, their line mate. Elon and Scott talked about Marchment as a player who, at that point, had 17 points in 20 games. Now he's up over a point per game, 21 games into the season. Louis, do we believe more in Mason Marchment now than we did Sunday?
You know, it has to raise expectations somewhat when you can put together a game like that. You know, it's a team that can score up and down the lines. Obviously, we've seen that, and they are, you know, the hottest scoring team in the NHL right now. It seems like no goalie can stand against them. Even the great Igor Shesterkin has surrendered some goals to him here today. So, you know, does it raise the ceiling? I think it does a little bit because you can see, obviously, that he is capable of doing quite a lot. And, you know, that line is no group of slouches. You know, Lundell has been a nice waiver ad for anyone who was able to pick him up a few weeks ago. Sam Reinhart, obviously, you know, I think his owners thought, well, this is a bummer. He's kind of getting demoted, but I'm sure they're not singing that tune right now. You know, we talked a lot about St. Louis having maybe one of the best third lines in the NHL, but I think we have to look at this group as the number one line 3 in the NHL right now.
You know what this really reminds me of is that run that Yanni Gourde went on his first year in Tampa Bay on a third line. Basically just, you know, it felt unsustainable. You're looking at the underlines and you're like, yeah, there's no way that he keeps up this point per game pace, but he's on this great team. The team can score up and down the lineup. He can play up and down the lineup. So if one night he's playing with Huberdeau, then of course he's going to look good. And if he's playing with Sam Reinhart most of the time, that is a very respectable line mate for Mason Marchment. So definitely a player that I'm not expecting the point per game level quite the rest of the season, but I mean 55 points, 60 points while he's hot, and yeah, I can't imagine dropping him right now, despite the fact that Florida has an unenviable schedule the rest of this mega week in the Yahoo schedule, something that we are going to talk about a little bit later on tonight. But first, let's get into an injury over in Washington.
Right. So unfortunately, this just came up here in the first period on Thursday night. Vitek Vanacek only managed a save and took a goal against before he was pulled from the game by spotters, and it was announced that he would not return. You know, the silver lining here, I think, is even, you know, if it is something mildly concerning, you know, he's got a nice break coming up, obviously, with the All-Star break here. We don't have a ton of information for you. Certainly, you know, watch Twitter. We'll try and keep things updated. But for now, let's have our fingers crossed for our Vitek Vanacek rosters across the fantasy hockey world, hoping that he'll be right as rain when he gets back from the All-Star break.
Probably bears mentioning that Ilya Samsonov will be likely to get the start tomorrow night. The Capitals have a back-to-back, so maybe worth a stream in a league where you're looking for goalie starts tomorrow. All right, Lewis, let's hop over to another goaltending situation in Toronto where Jack Campbell has been struggling 5 straight games with a negative goal saved above average, which indicates he's done worse than an average goalie would perform based on shot locations with the same workload. After basically a Vezina level start to the season, in Campbell's stead, or I guess while Campbell has struggled, Peter Mrazek has started to put his game together. Pretty solid since returning from his latest injury, putting up a .921 over his last 4 appearances. Campbell, though, as of the time that we record this, has made 20 saves in the Leafs' second half of a back-to-back against New Jersey. So I guess, Lewis, how much are we reading into the Jack Campbell skid, I guess?
So, you talked about the skid, and I think what's interesting about this is it seems that Sheldon Keefe thinks that it is, at least in part, due to workload. That Campbell, you talked about that Vezina level start, and Campbell has, aside from guys like Saros maybe, was for a while one of the goalies with the most starts in the league. And so he kind of went on that skid you were talking about. And even with this, so far, knock on wood, obviously, for my Campbell owners, this shutout that he's running through 2 periods against New Jersey. Let's keep in mind, first off, Toronto's probably the superior team. Second, he's looking to get revenge for that bad start yesterday. And the Leafs came all the way back from a pretty bad outing to beat the Devils, and I think that's got to be somewhat demoralizing. And they got off to a hot start. The Leafs did against the Devils today. So, I'm not reading too much into this one particular start, especially because, again, I think this is a workload issue more than it is a struggling issue. I think Keefe is going to try and get a few more starts for Mrazek moving forward. The problem is, the Leafs have a fair number of games, 9 left after the All-Star break in February, but there's only one back-to-back game on there. So you'd be relying on Keefe to follow through with his plan to give Campbell more rest. And I think he will, but it's going to be tough to predict. I would be more comfortable maybe streaming Mrazek in and out rather than trying to hold him and see where those starts come, just because they could be a little unpredictable. And if they come on those busy nights where you can't get him in anyway, you might have benefited from having someone else on your roster. So I am interested in Mrazek. I'm holding him right now in cupful, for his start yesterday. I probably will drop him when I have someone come off IR after the All-Star break, but we'll see where it goes in terms of sharing that workload.
Yeah, I think, I do have to point out that you took a chance to take your pot shot at the Devils as you do every episode at this point. But interestingly with Campbell, the skid didn't really start until the team started giving Mrazek more starts, and I wonder if maybe there might be a confidence issue there. Maybe it is a workload thing. I don't know. I'm not a goalie psychologist, and I pity anyone who is. Campbell has now given up a goal against since we started this segment. So I do think we're probably jinxing him to some extent already. But I think that the what I would worry about with Campbell is just the short term. Because I think that, halfway through the season, I'm feeling the burnout of all of these games every single night for several months at a time. I'm sure as somebody who's actually playing in these games, as a follower, it can be a little bit of a slog at this point of the season. I'm sure that for some of these athletes, it's tough to sort of be ready night in, night out. I could see, teams are going to have players and goalies are going to have their ups and downs. I wouldn't be surprised if this is kind of a blip when we look back on Campbell's season. Lewis, why don't you take us on to the Long Island where we're going to chat about an outjury.
All right, so Ryan Pulock made his return here on Thursday. He had not played since November 15th, so quite a long layover. He didn't really have a great start to the season, and certainly it seems like his power play 1 role appears to be a thing of the past, with Noah Dobson ascending into that spot. But I would imagine that he is available in an awful lot of bangers leagues out there, and if you are in one of those types of leagues, I might want to run and grab him off the waiver wire if possible. There has been some question, is this going to impact Dobson, who's been kind of cold despite all of his top power play time, although I believe he does have a point tonight, but just 2 points in his last 9 games previous to Thursday, and only one of those came on the power play. He has been shooting and blocking like crazy, so I'm not going to be giving up on Dobson until we see Pulak start to eat into those PP minutes, if that starts to happen. But I think the only thing that leaves me questioning a little bit is just that, the Islanders are scuffling a little bit. They need to try something to get going so that they can get back into a playoff position. So if, the coach sees potentially putting Pulak up on power play 1 and he has some success for a game or two, then maybe that's a spot where, we start to see some of those minutes start to disappear.
All right. Coming up, we are going to get into the second half of this mega week that we talked about. Look into the schedule at players that you might want to consider for streaming, or some players who you may not want to hold through a light chunk of the schedule. You're listening to Short Shifts. Welcome back to Short Shifts. And Lewis, as I mentioned before the break, we wanted to look ahead at the second half of Week 16 on Yahoo's schedule and take a look at teams that play a lot of games, teams that do not play very much, as there are a lot of those, and give some advice based on, or for ad drops on players who may be worth avoiding, who may be worth looking twice at if they've been lounging on the waiver wire. Why don't you start us off with a player that we may want to shed from our roster ahead of this layover?
Yeah, so for all of these players that we're trying to suggest be potential drops, we tried to pick folks who, were relatively widely owned. And so I want to start in St. Louis with a player near and dear to my heart, as most people know, Ivan Barbashev. But he's been a bit of a snoozer lately, despite some solid deployment, including, getting put on a line with Ryan O'Reilly. No points in 5 games, and only one of those games featured 2 or more shots. His ice time has been falling from the upper teens a week ago to 15, 30, or under in the last 3 games. And with no games to speak of until the 10th of February, I think Barbashev is probably the easiest drop of the folks that I'm talking about on this list. He had a really outstanding run. But, like we've seen, the top 9 shuffles around quite a lot. He hasn't been getting top power play time, and that top power play has really been humming. It hasn't been kind of the same split of success that we saw before. So, I love the guy, really enjoyed having him. I put emotion aside and dumped him at the start of the week for Alex Kerfoot, who has been a nice replacement, especially after he was reunited with Tavares and Nylander.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Honestly, looking at the Blues, there are a few players that I think are reasonable drops given their total dearth of upcoming games played. I would also consider dropping Colton Parayko. I did drop Rob Thomas in the Keeping Karlsson Ultimate Patron Fantasy League. It was not a smooth feeling. I think that I would also, I see Jordan Binnington on a lot of waiver wires, and that's not surprising given the situation and the lack of games played coming up for St. Louis.
Yeah, especially with Husso getting both of the games leading up to the break. I thought surely they might try to get Binnington in there to get his confidence back, but it wasn't the case. So I'm a little more into Husso right now as a possible hold.
Oh, interesting. Did they start Husso? I'm just kidding. Just teasing you. Lewis, we're going to hop over to the other side of the ledger and players who you might want to look at adding. I'm going to name a few players here. And in this, for this group of players, I looked at the teams that have 5 games played next week between Monday and Sunday. 5 games, absolutely chock full schedules. And there are no real heavy nights. So you should be able to fit these players into your roster each and every night next week. The first player who I want to mention is somebody who's not going to be rostered who is going to be rostered in most deeper leagues. And it's a player who we've mentioned a fair number of times the past few weeks. Go get Tim Stützle. Leaning, I've noticed that we've used the pause the pod gimmick quite a bit recently, and for players of decreasing value,
legitimacy.
And Tim Stützle, like the first time I remember pausing the pod coming up was talking about Artemi Panarin when he was a rookie, or maybe it was Zach Werenski. Anyway, Tim Stützle is not going to put up Artemi Panarin numbers rest of the season. But with 5 games next week, he needs to be rostered in all formats, all leagues. So go get Jimmy Stu, a must roster, at least for next week. And as we've mentioned on the pod, he's been fairly hot lately, shooting a bunch, scoring goals, and he's been riding shotgun with Brady TK. This is a great chance for him. I think we're both still on Tyler Ennis and Alex Formenton, who have been hot, and we've mentioned them a few times. I know that they've come up on Keeping Karlsson, the Keeping Karlsson Mega Show as well. Over in New Jersey, the other team who plays 5 games next week, Damon Severson has gone cold, but I do think it's worth keeping an eye on Dougie Hamilton's status because he could be a sneaky pickup with 5 games next week if Hamilton is out and Severson maintains that top power play spot, which the Devils seem to want to keep trotting him out there. Looking at the forward group in New Jersey, I think there are 2 players that I'm interested in for very, very different reasons. On the one hand, you have Igor Sharangovich, a player that's been mentioned on Keeping Karlsson shows often, but has been fairly cold lately. Unfortunately, when he isn't getting in on points, it's kind of a bummer. He doesn't do much else for you, but he's still playing on that line with Jack Hughes and Jesper Bratt, and that line is bound to put up some points next week. The other player I want to mention is Nathan Bastian, who is, I think, the opposite of Igor Sharangovich. You're not expecting a blow-up game out of Nathan Bastian, but he has been on Power Play 1 the past few weeks. So while he isn't heavily featured on that unit, I think you could do worse than a guy who might get in. You know, you could see him lucking into let's say 2 power play points next week. How nice would that be for a guy who's going to hit, 3 or 4 times per game? He's shooting twice a night. I really like Nathan Bastian as a stream just because of that volume that you're going to get out of starts from him.
Yeah, and he's got a few 6-hit games in there, I think. If you're in a Cats league where you're just kind of counting up those numbers, I mean, that's invaluable, especially when he's been playing 20 minutes a night. The next guy I want to talk about only plays 1 game next week, and it is Ryan Getzlaf with 5 points, 1 goal, 4 assists in his last 11 games, and only 1 game remaining in this match. I'm out on Getzlaf. He's been deployed with Troy Terry, but they've lost some of their early season magic. He's been seeing second power play time, and he missed a good chunk of that with leaving a game for injury. He did come back the next game, but if anything, playing through a possible injury makes me even less interested. So the Anaheim power play 2 is not where you want to bet your week. And unless he can, find whatever that magic elixir he and Troy Terry were sharing towards the start of the season, I think he is pretty uninteresting. I think he is over-rostered, and certainly with only 1 game left next week, you could do a lot better to help win your week than holding on to Ryan Getzlaf. Ditch that guy.
Are you ditching Ryan Getzlaf in all leagues or more so shallow leagues?
I mean, I think that I am okay getting rid of Getzlaf more universally. I think you can find more exciting half-point per game guys to pull up who are less well rostered and find themselves in better positions on better teams. So yeah, I'm pretty down on Getzlaf in general.
Interesting. I like Getzlaf. I like that spot that he's in. I feel like he's been a little cold coming back off of the injury, which you don't love to see. But yeah, ultimately, I'm not going to rush Getzlaf off of my roster in deeper leagues where I don't feel like I can replace him. But I definitely appreciate where you're coming from, that if you're looking for games played this week, you're up against a team who's going to have 7, 8, 9. I've seen some disparities up in the 12 and 15 games played disparity, and you need to claw your way back into your matchup. I can definitely see why you might drop Ryan Getzlaf. Lewis, I'm going to take us next to Montreal, a team that plays 4 times next week. And I want to talk about Mike Hoffman, who's just 15% rostered, but he's getting top power play deployment with a mostly healthy Habs squad. And he just came off of a 5-game point streak. And Lewis, I don't want to freak you out too much here, but if you look at Montreal's recent deployment, Mike Hoffman is playing at even strength with Laurent Dauphin. Can you believe that? He's getting Dauphin exposure. Yeah. Obviously.
Anytime you can be up next to the Crown Prince, you're doing something right.
Exactly. If I could do a dolphin noise here, I would do one to celebrate this momentous occasion in Mike Hoffman's life. But no, I mean, obviously in Montreal, they are not the ideal team that you're looking to stream off of, but you could do worse than a guy like Mike Hoffman, who's getting points on a top power play, gonna stay there. 4 games next week versus, like you said about Ivan Barbashev or Ryan Getzlaf, 1 game between those 2 guys. I'd rather have 4 from Mike Hoffman. That is for sure.
Yeah, I'm with you. I actually was, into Mike Hoffman at the start of the season. Obviously, things haven't turned out for Montreal the way we hoped it would. But at the same time, I think we don't want to get too much recency bias. This is not the team that is mostly Laval Rockets, right? It's a real NHL team. It's not a good real NHL team, but it is, a team populated by NHL players, and someone is going to score sometimes. And certainly, he's putting himself in a position where he might be the one to be able to accomplish that. So I see where you're coming with him. He is widely available naturally, as Montreal has kind of been poisoned for fantasy, through, this injury slump. So definitely a guy who is getting, at least the type of power play deployment you would want to see.
Yeah. If you're looking at him on the waiver wire, don't scoff, man. Hoffman.
Nice. All right. We're going to jump over to San Jose. And this is probably the most bold potential option here, and made more dangerous by the fact that this is someone who has a goal and an assist here tonight. But I want to talk about Logan Couture for a minute. He's been centering line too. He's frequently been separated from Tomas Hertl and Timo Meier. And he had hit quite a skid, up until this most recent game. He now has 1 goal and three assists in the last 8 3/4 games as of this recording. He did score that goal on the power play, which is one place where I like him. I don't like him so much at even strength right now. He's definitely been shooting more than Barbashev or Getzlaf. He gets that consistent power play 1 deployment. So I get why, this is, something that this may not be a move that works for you. He's a top 100 in Cupful guy. He's had a lot of success. So I understand if this is too much, but and he's not going to play again until Valentine's Day. That's the real headline here. We're going to be 13 days from seeing Logan Couture play again. I know he's got name value, and if he hits that waiver wire, there might be people who just snatch him right up because they recognize that name. But if this is, if you are in a position where you really need to win every week, and Couture not playing for that extended period, and you can get 4 or 5 games in from other players, that's even the Tuesday of the week after. So you might even be giving up a Monday game in the next match. You might consider ditching Couture. I know those 2 points tonight make that a much harder sell than I anticipated while writing this up.
Yeah, I think that Couture is definitely droppable. He did come up on the Keeping Karlsson Mega Show, and Scott and Elon talked about him as somebody who's a tough drop because he's, no matter what, he's going to get his 18 minutes a night. He's going to play. And he's a guy who is going to be leaned on by that Sharks franchise, has been ever since he took them, kind of on his back. He would have been the Conn Smythe winner if the Sharks would have won that Stanley Cup, I believe. But definitely I could see why you would want to ditch him in a lot of leagues. I have a question for you, Lewis. A player who's rostered in closer to 50% of leagues, so a little bit less than Couture, is James Reimer. Struggled a little bit recently, but I haven't seen him dropped in too many leagues. Seems like a tough hold to me, though, over the next 2 weeks. What do you think? Would you be dropping James Reimer in leagues?
So I've been kind of enjoying streaming goalies in. It seems like we've had quite a lot of tandems, that we've had players who've been able to step in and be successful. And that has made me a little more willing to reduce my numbers of goalies. I've pretty much just been rostering UC Saros because he's such a workhorse and he's playing a ton, and he's been playing great this season, which is lucky for me to have a guy that I can put in like that. But I've actually turned some losing ways around a little bit since I've stopped trying to guess which LA goalie, for instance, would be able to play. So he's had some rough outings lately. He's certainly cleaned up his game a little bit. But yeah, I think I would, if it meant, potentially saving my week and pulling out a win, I think I might be willing to lose him, especially because we did get news that Aiden Hill is going to be starting to skate next week. Which means, by the time the 14th rolls around, maybe we're right back to kind of a bit of a goalie competition with Hill and Reimer. Not that Hill has been, a huge impediment, necessarily. He, hasn't had a great season, but, we might see a little bit more of the back and forth.
Yeah, I think that Reimer is one of those players where it's like kind of annoying that he's been so good in his last 4 games. Like, because you almost wish that you could drop him and cycle him back in when the games come back. But I would be nervous to lose him now that he's working on his third, I guess his third quality start in his last 4. But yeah, it's tough with that schedule. I got to admit. Lewis, I have just one more segment here of players. These guys are playing 3 times next week. However, if you look at the schedule, they play these games prior in the first 5 days of the week. So if you add them to your lineup now, you can ditch them before the weekend and maybe turn that spot into 5 games played. I'm going to start first in Arizona, which is a tough team to stream off of, I admit. But Nick Schmaltz, playing with Clayton Keller at even strength, has been pretty solid lately. 5 points in his last 4 and 2 3-point games in his last 8. So he does have that go off potential, I guess, the GOP. The other player who has a bit of GOP is Kyler Yamamoto, who Elon and Scott discussed on Sunday, getting first crack playing with Evander Kane and Connor McDavid. I guess we'd call that the Evander Kane line in Edmonton, right? So Yamamoto got an assist over the weekend. I would probably wait until we're on the other side of the All-Star break because the Dave Tippett is known as Dr. Line Blender in Edmonton. But I think that if Yamamoto's still skating there next week, or actually, I guess after their game on Wednesday, he becomes really interesting to me. Alternatively, I really hate to say this, and I'm kind of doing like the see no evil emoji as I say this, covering my eyes, but Mikko Koskinen hasn't been too bad lately. 3 straight quality starts, 28 of 31 saves versus Ottawa in an overtime loss on Sunday. The Oilers have been starting to pick it up recently. You could do worse than, and this assumes that Mike Smith, who did return to practice, continues to struggle to get back on the ice. Even if he does, he's sort of turning into the anti-Ranta of Edmonton.
Yeah, I think that's true. I agree with you that Koskinen has started to turn around. It does seem like the team is playing with a little bit more confidence, which I think really helps. There was some controversy. I saw a lot of people saying that Stützle's overtime goal was a total thing of beauty, perfectly hit the corner. And then the other half of people were saying, oh, it's all Koskinen's fault. He was down on his pads too long. He gave up that corner so easily. There was no chance he could stop it as long as Stützle could elevate. So I think it sort of just depends on your own perspective there. But there's no discounting the fact that he has had those quality starts. I think that's what you kind of want to measure and you want to have from a goalie when they come out. So, I think you could do worse. And I would not be super worried about Mike Smith just because we haven't been able to see him, come in and play well. The one danger is it's clear that Dave Tippett likes the guy. They have a history together, but, Dave Tippett is also a guy who wants to keep his job potentially. And so we might not see a whole lot of Mike Smith potentially.
Lewis, I think that's all we have for today. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you to the listeners for joining us. We are going to take this upcoming Thursday off to recharge our batteries as the All-Star weekend approaches, and we'll see you back here on Tuesday. Lewis, I look forward to it already.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to coming back with gusto. Thanks everyone for joining us. Please give us a follow at ShortShiftsKK on Twitter. Brian and Elon can be found at Keeping Carlson, and Dave Betton of Stream Scheme is at NHL Stream Scheme. Also recommend you follow at Game Day Lines, at Game Day Goalies, and at Game Day News for all of your breaking information. Our intro and outro music was created by Pat Roach, and until we see you next time, play smart and keep your shifts short.